Hello, Internet, and welcome to the show. My guest today is my bassist and best friend. He is the bassist for Lipted Generation and also plays with Regdar and the Fighters, Nuclear Bubble Rap, and a million other bands. And we hardly spent any time talking about music this episode. Probably most of the episode was actually talking about police reform. But you know what? It's a great episode. So please enjoy the chat with Stephen Smith. All right, so yeah, I'm recording. So hey, welcome to the show, Steve Smith. Welcome.
Hello, good to be here. Sort of back-ish.
Well, hey,
You
this
know,
is your
in
your first time on the Greg Troyan show, which is totally different than the Lipstick panel.
right, totally different than the hundreds of times I've been on a podcast with you recorded while sitting in my office.
Right. This is an incredibly different experience because I am looking at a still image of you. You are looking at a still image of me. We are not looking at each other. We
As compared
are
to normal when I'm looking at my computer screen and you're looking at the back of my head.
right. It's a very different experience. So, hey, it's been a while since I talked to you. So, how's it going?
It's going all right. We're redoing my office, so if my sound is a little more ringy right now, it's because all the burlap is out on the clothesline.
You know, it sounds less ringy, but that also might be because you're not like shifting through like nails and buckets as we're talking, so that's probably helping with the sound quality on your end.
Well, those were also recorded with my phone, which is a compressor microphone, or compressor microphone, and I'm back on my normal Samson S12 cheap dynamic mic.
So, have you thought about shifting through a bucket of nails during this conversation so we can appropriately A/B it with previous discussions?
Do you want me to go get? And it was just a jar. I can go get my jar of screws again.
I mean, I don't, I
Also,
don't think, I don't think we really need to.
jar of nails sounds like a pretty mediocre metal song from the '90s.
Um, yeah, it does. I actually just got done listening to some Tragically Hip for the YouTube channel, so those reactions will be coming out sometime this month. So,
Ooh,
very, very Canadian.
bless you. I don't know if Tosh sneezing in the other room came through or not. So special surprise guest Tosh.
Yeah, her sorry came through, but not the sneezing.
Not the sneeze, but the sorry made it through.
So, for people on the channel, because this is primarily being consumed by my YouTube audience, although we are starting to get downloads on different podcast apps from the Greg Troyan Show, which, by the way,
Ooh, I should probably upload more episodes.
yeah, by the way, thank you for uploading the episode. As soon as you can figure out a way for me to manually do that myself without bothering you, I will absolutely do that.
Right. I mean, the trick is I've just got to basically rebuild the entire platform that our websites are based on because they're currently on just an HTML rip of a defunct platform that stopped being maintained, 3 years ago.
All right, so for people who don't know, Steve is my best friend and musical partner. Best friend asterisk that isn't my wife because them's the rules. Uh, and
I was thinking about the phrase, hetero life mate, and I realized like my other hetero life mate is in the other room, just in a different sense of the word.
your hetero life mate that you don't have any sexual attraction to. Although you do have that nice butt from biking, so you have that going for you. And
I haven't been biking much, so maybe not.
oh, well, I'm still keeping my booty up. I'm doing the squats, I'm doing jogging, so I'm actually in better shape now than maybe the last year.
Ooh.
But I think that's because working from home, like if I want to like take 15 minutes to work out between accounts, my coworkers won't be like, "Greg, why are you sweating gross?" I only have to deal with my wife saying, "Greg, why are you sweating gross?" And I'm just like, man, that's just one person I have to deal with, not a whole office for people who might call me to HR for working out. Bunch of nerds.
Bunch of nerds. The when quarantine first started, you know, Tosh and we were doing these challenges that one of her friends from high school was doing, where like the first one was an ab challenge, where on day one you do 30 crunches and a 30-second plank and 10 leg lifts, and then it just keeps escalating until you're doing like 250 crunches and a 3-minute leg lift and two or 3-minute plank, etc. So we did like 2 months of those.
Oh, so
But
you got to be
then we
like
sort of fell off.
jacked.
Well, I mean, we did 2 months of those, but quarantine started in April and now it's July and we have not kept up with those since then.
Yeah, I try to like my sort of minimum each day is like get at least 15 minutes of like heavy cardio in, and I try to do some light weightlifting, and that's sort of my everyday thing. Um, and I find like being like those fitness bros on Instagram, we're just like post a picture every day after post workout, even just to like as like a log and accountability. I found that it helps a lot
Mm.
for me. Also, I just started following David Goggins, and I'm just like, oh, I'm pretty sure I've seen that dude like jogging in Nashville in previous years because I would just remember this like super fit shirtless dude jogging all the time. I'm like, oh, that was David Goggins. I should have tried to become his
Is
friend,
that
but
what the
never
song
did.
was about?
What's the no the song Goggins was not about it about David
By Pain?
Goggins. No.
Mm.
But just like the fact that like it clicked in my brain because like I had definitely seen that dude jogging around. Like, oh, now I know who that is. That's like a super famous like workout guru who just has insane work ethic. So yeah,
Hmm.
just realize that. So. But yeah, I don't know the fitness dudes on Instagram. I don't know. I've started following them, and it's good. It's good motivation fuel. Just like you know, get off your ass, work out, do it, get it done.
I suppose.
So, and also, I've been listening to the Andrew Yang podcast, Yang Speaks, and he said, those of you who in quarantine are actually working out more need to be given more responsibility and have higher positions in our political system. So, according to Andrew Yang, I should run for office because I
Ah.
totally don't have a lot of baggage like wearing, makeup and heels and being in snake vomit. I'm sure there's nothing I've ever done that politically could bite me in the butt in the future.
Somebody will find that video of the Trayvon Martin dedication.
That was it's a joke that I feel was at the
It,
time the idea behind Snake Oil was to be the edgiest punk band possible and to write like parody songs that like a really edgy punk band would try to write. And so that was like the most cringeworthy thing I could think of. But I think in retrospect, it's like the Dane Cook rape jokes where like you push things too far for the sake of comedy. I think that was pushing things a bit too far. It's a joke I regret making and would not want to make again. As I'm speaking like a politician. But that's sort of the thing with comedy is like what you're trying to push the boundary, you're trying to make jokes, and just sometimes you just make a really really terrible decision. And I am on record as saying, man, that's a terrible decision that we made. I don't feel artistically good about that.
I don't feel artistically good about that.
I mean, look, I've made some regrettable decisions artistically. It's part of I think the journey of an artist. And so I'm trying to live with more integrity at this point. But yeah, I've done some stuff like, you know what? I regret doing that. If I had to do over, I wouldn't do that again. That's one of the ones I wouldn't do again. Was the it felt in poor taste, especially as like I've come to reflect upon it because um my coping mechanism for my bad childhood and stuff was just, oh, I'll just make jokes about it, and then that'll deflect away some of the pain. Um,
Yeah.
but not everyone chooses to process their hurt that way. And so, me processing someone else's hurt through that doesn't feel honoring to the victims and the families. And so, making a joke about that, even though like it was clear, like we were like anti Zimmerman and very clear about that, it still felt like maybe the wrong subject to joke about at all.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, Snakebite. We're in a number of bands together. How many bands have we been in together over the years, buddy?
Uh, let's see. So Regdar and the Fighters and Lipstick being the two primary ones, plus Greg Troyan project slash band, whatever we called it, any given show. Snake Vomit. Um, you had a guest appearance on the first Raptor Vomit album,
Oh, and also
and
Nuclear Bubble Wrap.
oh yeah,
We've been in that
although
at the same time, one show. That show
Oh
you played
yeah,
guitar, so we were in Nuclear Bubble Wrap at the same time at least once.
as compared to normally when it's just one of us at a time because they don't need two bassists.
Right.
Uh, and then I guested in that one Sir Arthur Conan Vomit show that you played.
Right.
I don't know how if we should really count three Snake Vomit derived bands, but
But
uh,
primarily, Lipstick is the main band we're in together, which is called Lipstick Generation because streaming services and such.
right.
But yeah, I mean, how many years have we been together?
What year is it now? 2020. So we first met in mid to late 2012, right?
Yeah, it was mid to late 2012, and then you started being in the band 2013.
Yeah.
So yeah, man, known you longer than my wife.
Well, I mean, yeah, we didn't need to do any math to do that to know that one though.
Right, but it's still sort of just interesting to think about like the relationships that stick with you over time. Like if you
Yeah.
think about like the friends that have come and gone, the fact that somehow like you and I have stuck, and now you and that douchey hair metal bro.
Right.
Like as far as friends you thought would have longevity, the guy whose band you joined as a joke is the guy that stuck around and still talks about like Red Dwarf and just radical centrism. Like that's the guy.
Radical centrism. Yang gang.
Hey, the radical centrism page has become a lot less toxic lately on Facebook.
I don't know that it has. I think it just goes in weird spurts of when it's toxic and what it's toxic about. Like right now, there's just one guy who's posting all these like landlords are the awesomest memes for whatever reason, and then getting yelled at by everybody else.
Well, I'm going to once again give my landlord credit for giving us a free month of rent and then giving us half off another month. And obviously, there was the eviction moratorium, but like, we haven't been late on any payments. So I'm saying,
That's good.
and he offered that to us before they offered the eviction protections. So I'm just saying, like, our landlord has been very reasonable throughout this process, and so I'll just give a shout out to like hashtag not all landlords.
Yeah, it's one of those things. Like, so the anarchist in me like feels very ambivalent about a lot of landlord discourse, in that to some extent the idea of a landlord, like you see like, oh, it's not a real job in leftist circles, which to a large extent the idea of just owning land and charging people rent for it is like not. I can definitely see the argument for that being an invalid career, but um property management is a real job. So when you
Right.
talk about like your landlord is the dude who owns the apartment complex and maintains the grounds and maintains the buildings, like it's not always feasible for people to own their own home. Like I lived in San Antonio for 2 years. Buying a house for 2 years would have been a really bad decision.
Right.
So renting was absolutely like a valuable service that was provided by my landlord, but it's also very possible to, take that out of the area of providing service in support of homing people to just, being a gatekeeper to prevent access to homes. So yeah, hashtag not all landlords. It's a complex situation. Like with a lot of these things, there's a lot of layers to stuff.
And now, man, everything is really simple and one dimensional, and one side is bad and one side is good, and they're totally not the same side.
Right? All cops are bastards and defund the police, but neither of those terms mean what you think they mean.
I mean,
Property is theft, but it probably doesn't mean what you think it means.
so
Taxation is theft, but that also probably doesn't really mean what you think it means.
so once again, I feel since I've got the anarchist on my show, uh, it's interesting the conversation with Jace almost like there was an hour and 22-minute podcast, I think, and like 1 hour of it was talking about politics, and then 20 minutes of it was like, oh, isn't colored vinyl neat?
Yeah, that sounds like Chase.
um, so I will once again say I have cops in the family. Not all cops are bad, but I also think the Blue Lives Matter thing has been co-opted by a lot of like racists who don't want to address the issues with Black Lives Matter. But also that said, Black Lives Matter, the organization, is becoming like a little bit troublesome and so needing to pay attention as they get more and more political power because of just I think the movement itself isn't an issue, but like the organization that call themselves Black Lives Matter definitely needs to be paid attention to for the issues that they are pushing that isn't necessarily directly related to the cause, but also you look at Martin Luther King and him, pushing for like universal basic income and things that would help
Yeah.
the economic situation of blacks that people largely don't talk about in his legacy. There's complexities, there's nuance, but we live in a world where there's two Republican parties, and just one of the Republican parties is called the Democratic Party. Um, you know,
Maybe, yes.
which corporatists do you prefer? These pro-war corporatists, these pro-war corporatists, or these pro-war corporatists that say they like brown people but don't actually do anything about it?
Yeah, that sounds about right.
So those are the two parties. The only difference being like one says they like brown people, one says they like Jesus, but otherwise they're the exact same thing. Um,
One says they like brown people, and one of them says they like one specific brown person who they portray as white.
so yeah, do you want to talk about cancel culture and
And
how
Candace
this
Owens.
and how, and how this podcast will do?
Are we getting canceled for your radical centrist views, Greg?
I mean, I don't know. Have I said anything that's cancelable yet in this podcast?
I don't know. Probably not. Cancel culture is one of those weird things, and it's a term that gets thrown around. Also, that's another term that probably doesn't mean what you think it means, and that as actually it works, the only people who get really canceled are the people who don't already have a lot of power and influence, or people like, it took years of Milo Yiannopoulos being just awful in public before finally there was enough, momentum that the corporate overlords were like, you know what, let's not publish this dude's book. And he sort of faded into obscurity. Meanwhile, Louis C.K. went to jail for sexual crimes.
Oh,
And,
he did go to jail?
when he got, oh, did he go to jail? I don't remember. He got charged.
I just thought he got canceled. Got canceled, then came
That's
back.
not true though, because he came back, 2 years later and had a Netflix special that
He
was
got canceled for
widely
2
well
years.
received. Got canceled for 2 years. Yeah, he never really got canceled. His income was never meaningfully affected. His career wasn't meaningfully affected. Like, if you're canceled, you can't really coming back after a couple of years means you weren't really canceled.
I mean, well, I think there is something to be said about being canceled for a couple years. Someone can be canceled and make a comeback, but I think there is something to be said like, hey, but also I think there's a difference between like Louis C.K., who clearly like engaged in like wrongful behavior that was arguably criminal. Like, there's a difference between being canceled for that and being canceled for like uh, just a difference in political opinion for like whether or not you support children or like teenagers transitioning and hormones. So like you can be canceled by the trans community if you're not 100% on board with that position. And I feel like there is like legitimate gray area there in terms of like, what kind of counseling, and like, whether or not you should like rush into that decision of immediately offering hormones to, preteens and teenagers.
Well, that's the trick, though, is like, if you're powerful, you can't get meaningfully canceled, though. Like, J.K. Rowling is increasingly like coming down as just a flat out turf.
But
And
like,
like,
like someone like you or myself who isn't that powerful, if
right.
you just say like, hey, I think there's some nuance to this position, I support trans rights, but I think that potentially giving hormones to a child is potentially dangerous, especially since a lot of like if you look at social trends, uh, like you have these teenagers who are saying I think I'm trans because their friends are all saying I think they're trans, and you look at like the percentages of teenagers who say that in close friend groups, and it doesn't match anywhere else in society, and you could say, oh, that's an argument that people are more accepting, or it's an a reflection of just like, hey, teenagers and trend circles, and you have all the teenagers cutting because that's what their friends are doing, and that's sort of that cycle feeding each other. And so it might not be a bunch of people who might come out as gay as opposed to coming out as trans. And so when you're giving hormones and permanently affecting someone's growth and development cycle, you have to, I think, take that with much more scrutiny and seriousness than like someone who's an adult making that informed decision for themselves, because there's a reason why we have age of consent laws. And so if you assume that a 15-year-old isn't able to make that emotional choice of like who they have sex with, are they mature enough to make that choice of what their body is? And you can make an argument either way, but I think there is nuance to it, and there isn't enough addressing of the nuance in concern for the child. And so if you just say like, hey, I have concerns over this, a lot of people will immediately just paint you as anti-trans, as opposed to like, hey, there's legitimate concern over this if you look at these issues.
Right. So to get out of the rabbit hole, like, yes, there is a concern of, people being deplatformed from communities that they like legitimately believe in and wish to support when they are, new to the community or relatively powerless and don't have much of a voice. Yes, that is definitely a thing. I think the trick is like the term cancel culture is used by powerful, usually right-leaning voices to say, hey, people are trying to silence our powerful right-leaning voices,
Right.
when in fact the actual people who are at risk are the powerless, like the McCarthyist kind of thing, where like Congress got involved and told a bunch of people in Hollywood, like, here is your speech that needs to be regulated. That's
Right.
like, that's real cancel culture, but that's not what gets called that.
But
What
I,
gets
I feel
called
like
that is
I feel like part
you
of it
know
is okay, sorry, go ahead.
Jerry Seinfeld. What gets called that is dinosaur Jerry Seinfeld feeling like he can't do the college circuit anymore.
Right, but I that is not really my concern necessarily with cancel culture either. It's that I feel like we're becoming much more rigid in our ideologies and groupthink, and there's not as much room for like dissension and a reasonable debate. And I feel like and possible, part of it is anecdotal, part of it might be like the bubbles that I see in my Twitter feed, and just in my Facebook news feed. But it seems like um on the left you have this incredible like it's becoming much more rigid in its ideology and not room for dissension, which part of the appeal of the left for me was that you could have that open debate, and it was about the free expression of ideas and trying to get to the best solution. And it seems like the left is more becoming like a rigid, dogmatic religious ideology, and the right is still that, but it seems like the left is turning into that, and that's where my frustration comes in. Like, come on, you guys were supposed to be like the better of the two options, and like you still kind of are, but now you're becoming, as bad as the other side in certain aspects, and so it's made me personally very frustrated as a left leaning guy as I'm looking at the left, you know, like losing its collective mind, and it's very frustrating for me to see that because it's getting harder and harder to justify like yeah leftist policies or leftist ideology. Like I think
Well, this
the extreme factions are getting a lot more of a say in mainstream leftist discourse. So like the farthest extremes are moving into the mainstream, and I think that is like part of the issue that like our leftist issues, like we don't really have a very leftist party in the United States. We should have a real leftist party,
mm-hmm.
but it feels like the stuff from the extreme ends we're taking are the worst ideas of the far left. We're like there's actually good ideas on the far left, and it seems like the only ones moving into the mainstream are the really shitty ones, and that's where my frustration is coming.
I think a lot of good ideas from the far left are, making their way into the discourse. Like the defund police, again, doesn't mean what you think it means, is actually a very good idea.
I see.
The
I actually think we should give the police more funding, but fund them completely differently. Where I think pay police officers better, so it's a more desirable job, um, and also make it where like they're not just like wanting to work like an extra 40 hours of overtime each week to make that sweet money, and also give them more training, make it more consistent. Where in the military you have constant training and retraining, and you keep that process of training over and over and over again. And part of that training is like de-escalation training, and make sure they go through that over and over and over again because it's been proven to work. So take that military aspect of just like train and train and train and spend like 10 or 20% of their time in training so that they're always in that habit. I think that's going to make a bigger difference. Like I understand, like put some of that money towards social services and helping the community, but I think if you put the money into training, and this isn't like the solution to gun violence is more guns. That's not what I'm saying. So I want to make it clear it's not that, but I'm saying that if we put more money into like making sure that police are paid better and that they're trained better, I think that will reduce the stress levels, make them more cognizant, make them more aware, and I think that will help. And obviously you need to do like better screening processes, a better internal affairs system. You probably, in terms of funding, you would want have like a completely separate entity, like a federal entity that goes in and polices all the police stations. Instead of just like relying on each department's own internal affairs department, like have something on the federal level that's
Hmm.
supervising. I think those are good things. But when people just say like just take money from the department and give it to these other places, I think that's not necessarily going to be the solution to the problems of the violence and escalation. Like yes, the police department doesn't need that tank necessarily, so like you don't need to give them the old military gear. But I think taking money from the department, to me that doesn't. It's a nice idea to give more money to the social services, but I don't think that's the actual solution to the issue.
I think it's absolutely necessary to be, funding real pro. So the problem with it, of course, is that like there's no single solution because policing is one of those things that is per municipality. It's so decentralized that there's no one size fits all fix for the police in this country. But there are a couple of things that do need to be applied all around. Like, yes, you want your training to include lots of de-escalation. You probably need to like either get rid of or massively reconsider qualified immunity. Civil asset forfeiture should probably be eliminated. The like state and federal private prison contracts probably need to be eliminated because that creates all kinds of perverse incentives. And you also need to like address, but you do need to address the fundamental idea that if somebody calls 911, the default response is not somebody with a gun. If somebody calls 911, unless the actual thing that needs to be addressed is like an immediate threat of violence that can only be matched with other violence, their default response should be somebody who is able to actually address that circumstance. So it's like I like to bring up the fire department, right?
Right.
Like nobody thinks that it would be a good idea to defund the fire department and move those resources into the police department. They're just like not the right tool for putting out fires. Like of course, if you found a city that only had a police department and somebody showed up with a proposal and said, let's take some of that budget and buy a fire truck instead of tanks and have a fire department who will fight fires, like nobody would look at that and be like, what? That's completely ludicrous. These are our best options for preventing arson. Like it's and I think you just need to apply that thinking to more ideas. Like if somebody is threatening to jump off a building, a dude with a gun is not likely to be a helpful person. Like you need somebody who's trained to deal with that exact sort of situation.
Right, and I think that's reasonable to have different people for different situations. But I think sort of the problem, as we've mentioned, is like some of the nuance gets lost. Where I've heard people say they should send the counselor people to domestic violence calls. No, though you do not want a counselor without a gun there, because in a domestic violence situation, like you want a cop because things, you know will potentially get dangerous. Like you want someone with a gun because that's where like people get killed because like and this has come from someone who's been in those domestic violence situations. Like you want a cop there in those situations. Um, so it really does depend on like what the situation calls for, and you're right. Well, with the fire department, they don't just put out fires. Like if someone is like my grandpa would have diabetic attacks,
Yeah, they
and
do a
so
lot of medical work
yeah,
too.
they do a lot of medical work. So in that case, that's something that the fire department does. So there's room for different kinds of people to respond to different situations. Um, but I feel like defund the police. Unfortunately, some people have taken that to mean get rid of the police in this city and just have nobody there and like have gone towards the full anarchy argument. Like some people are making that argument, and that's where I think some of the issue is lying. Like idiots on both sides. There's fine people on both sides, but there's
Mm,
also idiots on both sides.
man, I feel like that is not a good quote to be abusing.
But I mean, like the people who are saying like get rid of all police and just like we'll replace it with something else, and like I think there's I really think the solution is more funding for police and also some different departments to respond to different situations, like the fire department with medical emergencies, and maybe having counselors to respond to like suicide situations. I think that's something I think we can agree on. But I think giving the police less funding is not the solution in most instances, in my eyes, because I think we need to put more funding into training.
I think you do need more funding in training per capita, but in a lot of instances it's probably worth reducing the capita itself, right? Like we like I grew up in small town Wisconsin, where usually any given town has 1 to 2 cops who work there, and they spend most of their day just sitting in a speed trap on the edge of town. Like it's not a particularly good allocation of resources, and that they're not stopping crime. They're not really affecting traffic patterns in any meaningful sense. They're just generating some small amount of income for their own department by, issuing $150 tickets a couple times a week. Like it retraining that personnel, you scale that up to a city size, like retraining personnel who aren't really contributing anything anyway to the safety of the city. Like it would be better to put those resources towards different departments, and then like have leaner, better police departments is my thought.
I
Like
I agree with
absolutely
that
train them
to an
better, but you
extent.
don't necessarily need as many.
I agree with that to an extent. But what I would say is that I think that across the board standards for the entire nation, where just like every officer just spends like 10% of their like paid working time training, um, I think will just be better for the entire nation because just like if you just put in that like military mindset of just like and like the
I
good
would
military
avoid
mindset.
the militarism of it.
But
I would probably change the terminology and not continue to militarize the police.
I just there's certain military figures that I've started to follow where they're talking about just like the discipline, and they've also talked about like how what officers have done in the United States would be considered war crimes in other nations. and
Yes,
and so they're just
you are
like,
not allowed to gas medics. That's just like so many war crimes.
yeah. So what I'm saying, like the military guys that I've been following have been saying like these are war crimes, and you need to treat them like the military and like hold them to the standard of
You need
like,
rules of engagement.
yeah, you need to rules of engagement, and you need to drill those over and over again to make sure they understand the rules of engagement, and so they don't slip into bad habits. And they've said
Mhm.
like continuous training is what helps prevent their people from committing war crimes because police officers like that in like small town Wisconsin, that's not a stressful job, but like in Chicago or freaking Cleveland, it's going to be a stressful job, and you're going to need that training over and over again, so that like when you see a kid with a toy gun, your first instinct isn't to shoot. Your first instinct is, how do I de-escalate the situation so that we don't have a scandal on our hands, so that we don't take an innocent life, so that
Mm-hmm.
like, and I think that training, that de-escalation, I think that is what is going to be like for me. That if I have to like push one solution towards the police aspect of gun violence, it's training. Towards the other aspects of gun violence in America, you know, uh, the more I look at it, the more I find it harder to find a solution for. But at least for the police thing, that's the thing I would push more than the defunding. I would say is increase training and make it consistent like all the time.
Oh, I
And
think you're falling into your own trap that you've suggested everyone else runs into, though, which is like there isn't a singular, simple one solution. It's like
there no
you
there yeah.
need really comprehensive fixes for complex problems.
But I'm saying like if I only get to pick one, like I get one on my checklist. That's the one I would push for the most. So like if you're looking at comprehensive economic policy for the United States, where there are people who are saying, I want to, socialize healthcare or get rid of student loan debt or UBI. The one I pick of the three is UBI. If I only
Ah,
get to pick one, so it's like you should do all of them, and it's a complex thing, and there's a lot of issues. But I'm saying if I only get to pick one, in my case with the police thing, it's the increased consistent training. And then if I get to pit two, second would be the federal oversight, like a separate internal affairs for all police stations across the country. So like if I get to pit two, that's my second one. And then beyond that, I think there's, other steps that should be taken as like, reallocation of resources and such. But if I only get to pick one, that's the one I pick.
mm.
But no, I don't think that alone is the solution to it. But I think of the different ideas that I've heard out there. I think that's the one that would do the most good if implemented like immediately.
Honestly, I would say that given those, if we only have if it's the three steps to fix policing in this country, I feel like an better oversight and actual accountability is probably more effective than like setting new training standards.
You're probably right, but I
In
also
that,
think it's more likely to get the better training standards
right?
than the
Like
oversight. So I'm like, this is the one that, yeah, you're right. The oversight is a better solution.
training would follow from better oversight. Like if there
Right.
was real accountability for cops behaving badly, then the actual departments who have to deal with the fallout of their officers behaving badly would be incentivized to train them better so that they don't.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. I think that is the better first choice, but I picked the first choice that I thought could actually work in America. Because
It's also fun because it's like the economy is way more complex, but also like I don't want to say more compartmentalized, but like the three ideas that you suggested, each of those functions so independently of each other that like
right.
you're able to take them more as a vacuum. I think like a better comparison with like how do you deal with homelessness in a city? Like there's a lot of research suggesting that just put people in housing first, but if you just say, oh, everybody gets free housing with no further follow up, no increased access to training or job search help kind of thing, like you don't actually fix the problem.
Right.
uh, it's more complex than that, and more individualized. You need to have boots on the ground, actually finding people where they are, helping connect them to the resources that they need.
Yeah, and as far as like the housing thing, like I've noticed since like the COVID pandemic began, we've actually gotten a big boom in homelessness in Nashville. I've seen a bunch more Hoovervilles trump up. I said Trump up because I was thinking about Trump and just his total mishandling of this crisis. But unfortunately, I've seen like tent cities pop up in places where they weren't necessarily there before, and in very large numbers.
Mm.
Um, where we're in the second Great Depression. It's here.
Yeah.
It's here, and I am going to be completely honest. I did not think I'd be on the proletariat. Not no, sorry, the bourgeoisie side of the Second Great Depression. Like I thought, like if there's a Second Great Depression, I'd be the one on the street. But
We're
I'm
like, oh shoot, I got a home.
yeah, I'm just like I have a house and food. I didn't think that I would be one of the lucky ones, but because corporate healthcare is such a mess, I still have a job. Because we haven't figured out socialized medicine yet, I'm still employed. So thank you, corrupt healthcare system. Uh,
Right.
but yeah, it's just the fact that we're like at that like extreme tent city stage is really really concerning.
Hmm.
Like I'm And so I've said before, about like the last recession is that we didn't complain about the economic hardship because we had, smartphones and PS4s and whatever to distract us, so we didn't feel bad about, how screwed we were getting economically. Um, but I think as more and more people just like start losing their homes and just like, the worker class, who is dependent on, the economy being open is getting like no help from the government. As that continues, I don't know. It's just it's getting very French Revolution esque around here, and I'm not feeling that comfortable about it because like I'm still on the lower end of things, but I'm just bourgeoisie enough. Like he has a house, get him. I'm like, ah, jeez.
Guillotine him.
So yeah, that's where
Yep.
I'm at. But hey,
Good
hey,
time.
homeowner, a guy who actually owns property.
Oh dear. Yeah, I'm definitely getting guillotine. That'll be a bummer.
Good times, great oldies.
Good times, great oldies. I mean, who knows? Maybe I'll just flee to Canada this year.
I mean,
Zionist uncle fled to Canada. That worked pretty well for him.
yeah, but
That's not fair. His dad fled to Canada and just he was a kid, so he came along.
well, fingers crossed. Hopefully, um, history will repeat itself, and a total like plutocrat who doesn't care about the working class gets elected against a big businessman who watched over an economic collapse and didn't do anything about it. And then the plutocrat who doesn't want to help working poor people is forced into being a progressive. So maybe Joe Biden will be the next FDR, in that if you look at their records before being president, both of them were really shitty politicians. And maybe Joe Biden will be just forced into doing a good job because he'll have no choice. That's the best case scenario.
He's gonna pull us out of a depression. Oh, and then with the help of World War III. Oh dear.
I mean, well, hoping that part isn't the history repeating itself, but I mean,
Hmm.
if you look at Joe Biden and FDR, like there's a lot of parallels into like how much they loved rich people and how they were just in the pockets of corporations, but then just like in order to avoid a bloody revolution in the streets, just like fine, I'll be a progressive and help poor people.
Oh, good times.
Yeah. So how's the music going, buddy?
It's going all right. I need to get back into practicing. I actually have a number of shows coming up over the next couple months, all virtual. But Regdar and the Fighters is doing a set for the Filk track of Dragon Con, and Imaginarium Con is going full virtual, and we're going to be doing a concert there as well as a live songwriting session.
Nice,
Um,
nice.
I'm also backing up Night Sabers as they do similar events.
So are you going to be completely virtual, like doing a Zoom call, or will you be in person for that, like with Night
Uh,
Sabers?
oh, I'll be in person with the two other people there, kind of thing.
So are you
I am not. I
are you gonna wear a mask while doing your backing vocals?
Maybe I might get tested beforehand. Like just periodically getting COVID tests to make sure that we're clear before hanging out with people. I have not been fully isolating, but I've kept myself to sort of a limited circle of about 10 people to interact with. Although I should probably need to isolate a bit more right now. In that last week, we went out to East Tennessee, the Gatlinburg Pigeon Forge area, to hang out with Tasha's family, and it turns out that that's a hot spot, and everybody is bad at socially isolating. So we probably need to get rechecked, having come back from there, and be like, okay, so all those random people who were tubing that ended up standing next to us while we just tried to get some food, and none of them wore masks. Oh, we don't trust them.
Yeah, I've been I think there's a spectrum with the socially distancing, socially isolating thing, and I've probably been a little bit more on the extreme end of things, if I'm being
Yeah.
honest. Um, but also because like I've been like I was tracking this before it came to the states, so when it finally came, I was just like kind of ready for it. I'm just like I'm not taking any fucking chances on this thing. Um,
You had already been hoarding toilet paper and flour.
no, because I was broke and I couldn't afford to hoard toilet paper and flour.
Your
So,
sourdough recipe was already amazing.
basically, it was just like me hoping it didn't come because I'm like, shoot, I have no money and I didn't feel confident about my company moving to work from home fast enough. But I warned them about it as soon as it came to the United States, and then we actually got to work from home slower than we should have, but still we ended up doing it. Um, but yeah, I just, I'm a bit on the extreme end where like I'm not really hanging out with anyone in person outside of the home.
It's
And
sad. We miss you, Greg.
I mean, I miss you too, but also like like some of the people in your circle are not as smart with the social distancing, and so when you hang out with them and then I hang out with you, I know there's like a calculated risk. Like there's
Hmm.
certain people I know who are just like, let's call them space cadets, um, and so
Chris has actually been very careful about it
uh,
because
I mean,
because his
there are some who
his
are being
his
careful about it, but there are some who are not being careful about it, and I know they're in that circle. And so, like, I miss you. I want to hang out with you. I want to hang out with my best friend, but I can't justify the risk of potentially hurting others in my household for that when I can just
right.
like call you on the phone and say, "Oh, what would we do? We would hang out and record a podcast. Now we just have to do it over Skype."
Uh Weak. Yeah, like I'm surprised by like who in my circle is exercising caution, and like who's being risky and running into things. So like, our friend Chris, who like he's the sort of person you might expect to be kind of a space cadet, but he's really upset about the fact that COVID has basically killed the music industry,
Hmm.
which was both his day job in that he worked for a venue, and his passion in that he loves to play. He just wants to play music.
Hmm.
So he's just really really distanced himself from everyone and has been very careful because he wants the music industry to come back regardless of anything else. Meanwhile, our friend Michelle from Blue Matches, who's like been super careful this entire time, she went to one family gathering and like everybody got exposed to COVID there. So she's like, great, we may very well have it because some kid's estranged father didn't bother to tell his mom that he had COVID when the kid spent the weekend with him.
Yeah, that's the thing. So it's just like just one person being an asshole or just not paying attention can just wreck it and spread. And that's sort of where, I'm at. And so that's why I am, limiting myself very, very much. Like I'm still like I'm going to parks, but I'm, staying away from people at the park. Um, and I'm only like we're not going into restaurants. We'll do to go, but otherwise we're not going to restaurants either. And
Mm-hmm.
like, man, I miss my buffets.
Yeah.
Uh,
I
and
don't think those are coming back in a meaningful sense for a while,
I know they're not
though.
coming back. I feel like most of them are just gonna straight up die.
Yeah.
So like Asihi probably dead, Sushi Train probably dead, and
Sushi Train's open, actually.
they're open, but I don't know how long they can survive. Like
Yeah.
the thing is, like so many restaurants are struggling. Like we are heading hardcore into like super oligarchy mode where all the small businesses are failing and who are surviving? Just the giant mega corporations who got bailed out because it's
Right?
so
The ones who can absorb this kind of expense.
right. So it's socialism for the mega rich, and the ones who could absorb this expense got bailed out anyway. Like, yeah, we
Right?
could afford this, but if you want to give us money so our stocks don't plummet, I mean, we'll take it. Like, we'd be fine. We'd lose a little bit of money, but we'd be fine. Um, but yeah, so did you think that I would be one of the people who would be more cautious?
Uh
Or did you think, like, Greg's going to party no matter what?
I mean, I didn't picture you being your dad, but I pictured you not being as cautious as you've been. You've been like, yeah, I expected you'd probably be one of the one sorts who had like a small circle that you were hanging out with, and that's about it.
Yeah,
Edward's paranoid of disease has not been as cautious as he should have been.
yeah, that's where I'm. We're calling people out, but I mean, fuck it. That's the nature of podcasting. Uh,
Right? This is really good content that we're just like name dropping our friends who like may or may not listen to this episode and may or may not be upset about being mentioned, and nobody else cares.
I mean, uh, this show has an audience. My YouTube channel has done better than our band channel. Like all those years we spent like hustling, working hard, putting out content for the band, putting out music videos, promoting singles. I just did some reactions and already it's more successful.
We should have
Um,
just had a podcast.
I mean, we did have a podcast, but it turns out that you remember like we've had so many discussions about how I'm just like burnt out on derivative content and how
Mm-hmm.
everything is just like riding on the coattails of someone more successful and just that's how they're successful is just derivative and not enough original content is being produced.
But then you
Um
discovered that it was great to make that kind of thing.
um I think it I thought it would be fun just to see where it went and I still enjoy it because I'm offering what I feel is like it's not just like I'm listening to a song like "Yo, dog, the beat was good." Like I'm going into like more detailed analysis. Like it's like a less organized version of the "I'm in love with that song" podcast, where he'll write out a script and then break down the song component by component. I'm just doing it live, and so I think because I spent all those years as a musician honing my craft and honing my ear, I'm finding it fun to do. It's not as fulfilling as creating original content, but I think it's good for me at the stage where I was becoming burnt out on the band thing going nowhere.
Yeah.
Where it's like, you can put all your heart and passion and soul into whatever song you have coming out, but if no one listens to it, what is the point of all that effort? Um, and part of me was making music just because I wanted the song to exist so I could listen to it and have it on the playlist. But I think at this point, I'm finding a lot of fulfillment from writing, and the people on the channel are happy. Like
Mm,
they're enjoying it, like they're getting a kick out of it. And if I'm making people happy with what I'm doing, I think that's ultimately more important. As long as I'm bringing some joy and happiness into the world with stuff I'm doing, I'd rather have bring joy to like 1,000 people watching one of my reactions than put a song out there that no one listens to and no one gets any joy out of. You know what I'm saying?
yeah.
Like it's disappointing because I think the music is better than the reactions that I'm doing, but it's the nature of the beast and the honesty with it. And I guess the goal would be like this talk show is actually very fulfilling for me because it's just real conversations with people, seeing where they go, the ebb and flow. Because I know you don't listen to Rogan, but I think freeform conversation and just seeing what comes out, you can learn a lot about yourself, about the other person, about life, and you can get some very enriching experiences out of it. So like this for me is completely fulfilling without like the asterisks that maybe some of the reactions have. We're just like, yeah, this is cool, but it's not as the reactions are fun, but they're not soul fulfilling. The music is soul fulfilling, but it's maybe not fun anymore. This is at least both, and so that's the benefit of the talk show,
Mm,
if that makes sense.
yeah.
But like I still like want to make music and want to write because it's just like it's part of my DNA, And you know how that is.
Right.
We're just like, even if no one listens to it, you just still have this like compulsion to do it. We're just like, I have to make this. It's just in my brain, and it just needs to come out.
Right.
And so that's why I'm like, oh man, Steve hasn't like recorded for his Patreon in a couple months. I know you've been busy, but you probably have been going like a little bit nutso on that end at least.
Yeah. I haven't actually been practicing my instruments either. So like I practiced some Regdar songs for the first time this week and was like, why do my fingers hurt? Also, I forgot that this is really fun.
Yeah, because I think like of the two of us, I think you're more of a pure musician than I am.
Yeah.
Which, if you looked at us, I think that's extra hilarious because if you had to say which one of them do you think has the greater like love for books and writing of these two, and which one has the allegiance to rock and roll? Like that's not. If you just took a side by side of us, you wouldn't think which one was which.
Who
But
has
you're
the allegiance to rock and roll?
yeah, you have more allegiance to rock and roll than I do, dude.
I suppose.
Because, like, I'm like, yeah, you know what? If I don't make more rock music, as long as I can write my books, and you're like, no, I need to make music till I die.
Right?
So really, just the I'm a poser is what it comes down to.
It's true.
But then
Poser
again,
Greg, they call him.
but then again, aren't all hair metal musicians really posers? And aren't all '90s alternative guys real musicians?
It's true, yeah.
I mean, there we go, verified on the podcast. Yes. So speaking of music and socially distancing, I think we should just finish that David Bowie single without me doing vamps at the end and just put it out there because I'm probably not coming over to record.
Oh, yeah. I forgot we were working on that.
Yeah, I feel like hey, it's just another good thing to toss out there. I had actually that collection of demos that I put out on my YouTube channel has a couple Adam songs, and I haven't gotten a takedown order from Adam yet. So
Ooh,
see
fancy.
yeah, see how long that goes. I did specifically put not for profit because that works on YouTube videos when people do that.
Does it actually, or is it just
No,
that like
it
they
doesn't.
weren't getting noticed and they continue to be not noticed?
They weren't getting noticed and continue to get not noticed. But I'm like, you know what? Like these demos are just gonna sit around on a hard drive. No one's ever gonna hear them. I mean, and it's not like his career is taken off in any way, so who cares? Like
Right.
you know,
So you're saying there is a version of Rock and Roll Boulder available now, huh?
yeah, you can hear. I mean, it's been on my SoundCloud for years, and he never said a word. Been on my SoundCloud for years. I don't even know my SoundCloud login, but it's been there. But yeah, I put up Rock and Roll Boulder and Nashville Saves Christmas, um, which I thought my vocal on that track was much more abysmal than I remembered it being, and then I listened to it like, oh, this actually is a tolerable vocal from me. It isn't an absolute train wreck of a vocal performance, which is the bar I hold myself to as a lead singer.
Right. It's a good bar to hold yourself to.
As opposed to just being good like you.
Right? One of the recording forums I'm on, that was a conversation that like there's one guy who's been particularly prolific in the last couple of months and like uploading at least one new song per month for feedback. And like one of the constant bits of feedback he gets is like, makes your vocal louder, like get your vocal further out front. And he's like, no, I really don't like my voice and I don't know how to do vocal melodies. And like everybody's like, you're a bassist, you play melodies on the bass, just do those sorts of things with your voice instead. And one of the threads was just everybody affirming with each other, like, yeah, I also hate the sound of my own voice. Like, yeah, I hate to listen to my recordings. I'm like, I love my voice. My voice is great. I derive great pleasure from just like stacking up a dozen copies of my voice and listening to that and be like, yeah, that sounds good.
I think your voice sounds good. I think my voice sounds good in certain contexts. The problem is I'm the stuff I write doesn't always suit my voice. And so I don't like the limitations I have as a singer, and I don't want to adjust what I think is the best way to perform the song because I am not the best singer for the material. So what I really need to do is outsource the stuff for the when I hear it in my head, and then get a
Mhm.
singer who's appropriate for it. And then for the songs where I feel like my vocals shine, like I think there's certain tracks where I sound very good as a singer and I work very well in the context of the piece. But then there's stuff that I write where I'm just like not the right guy for the song. Like
Mhm.
it's Christmas and you don't want me here. I know you're not necessarily that big on that song in particular, but I
Yeah.
think the nasally glam voice works for a T-Rex esque nasally glam song. Like it works because like that's the genre and that's what people do. Like it's like, oh, it's Pretty Boy Floyd meets T-Rex. Here's this nasally singer with like an Alice Cooper snarl. That works. But Merle, for example, where the song is basically a Meatloaf song, it's a Steinman song, and then I'm singing, even though that song came off pretty well in the finished product, I would not be, if you had another singer sing that same song, it would come off as much better. So,
Hold that thought. My microphone is slipping and my posture is getting increasingly bad, so I'm going to make loud noises for a moment.
okay.
All right, there we go.
But
I
yeah,
don't know if
so
you're doing editing of these at
oh,
all.
I am doing as little editing as possible. I am so burnt out on podcast editing. I don't like podcast editing. It's terrible. I hate it.
I
It's
don't think anybody likes any kind of editing. Editing sucks.
Yeah, editing such, but I feel like especially podcast editing, where just like I feel like the bar is so low, and especially since like the popularity of freeform is like the spontaneity and honestness of it. So like with the lipstick panel, because there's a format, um, quote unquote format. Um, there's more desire to edit just stuff that isn't a natural part of the conversation, and if something is really egregious, yeah, you want to edit even this show. Um, but once again, the appeal of freeform is just like you just say whatever is on your mind and just see where the conversation goes.
Mm.
And you're just like, man, I don't get it. Like, you don't just like have a structure for these things. You just talk, hang
I
out.
really like YouTube pacing. I still feel like is some of the finest pacing for the human voice, where it's just really snappy, of like no gaps. Get it under that 10-minute limit.
Well, I think what's the there was a quote, maybe it was Bill Maher, where he said people's attention spans are either 10 minutes or 3 hours.
Mm.
And there's not like an in between. um I think there's something to be said about like there's sort of like two mindsets and approaches when it comes to consuming content. And I think that 10-minute bite-sized content, there's definitely a place for it. But I think part of the appeal of freeform is that you have the ability to really expound upon your ideas and not just become a soundbite that can be taken out of context. So like when we were discussing like the Trayvon Martin thing earlier, if you just took like, you know 2 minutes of it, that could be taken out of context. But when you have time to fully expound upon how you feel about the things, um, it can be like, oh, this person isn't a bigot. He just made a joke about a tragedy that was trying to, cope with the tragedy in his own way, and then he realized that that joke was in poor taste, as opposed to bigot white person makes joke about Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman and just that entire terrible, terrible, terrible tragedy.
Hmm.
So but there's validity to both. It's not that I think one is inherently bad and one is inherently better than the other. But I think there's room for both, and I think there's something to be said of the, not to keep going back to Rogan, but the fact that that guy has figured out how to make money off Spotify when the rest of us musicians haven't. Um,
That was a Hard Times article recently of we follow up with the least successful of the Manpower hosts, who doesn't even have his own podcast. And they just like did career retrospectives of everybody after that show started podcasts up to Rogan, except for Jimmy Kimmel, who for whatever reason went on to become a loser with a late night TV show.
right. Well, Rogan, it's actually the Man Show, but also, man,
Did I say the Manpower?
Manpower, Freudian slip.
Whoops.
But I would definitely say this. Like, it took me a long time to come aboard the Rogan train because I'm just like, so you're saying the guy from fucking Fear Factor, The Man Show, and UFC cage fight commentary has a good podcast? Bullshit. Like, I refuse to believe like that fucking guy, the guy with the show where like eat a goat penis for $1 million or whatever it was. Like, I refuse to believe that that guy would have anything intelligent to say. And then I listen to his show. I'm like, oh shit, this is really good. And I know no one who hasn't listened to the show will believe me. And that's the annoying part because I know when I started listening to it and talked to you about it, you're just like, up there's Greg just diving into the douchey bro part of his persona.
Right?
And I'm just like, yeah, I know there's nothing I can do to convince Steve that the guy who had the show with the eating of the goat penises has like really intelligent, nuanced content. Like, he's not gonna believe me. There's nothing
The,
I can do to
sh-
convince him.
the show with the eating of the goat penises.
But like, if I were to meet Rogan, I'd be like, dude, Fear Factor was a shitty show. I'm sorry, dude. Like, but I think this also goes to show that like you don't have to like everything that someone does to appreciate something about them. Like, there's probably people who actually no, there's definitely people because if you look at the numbers, there's people who enjoy my reactions in my talk show who don't like my band. Um,
Hmm.
so really, I'm just the Joe Rogan of failed hair metal projects.
That's such an incredibly esoteric and specific description of a person. The Joe Rogan of failed hair metal podcasts
Projects.
projects.
You know the Lipstick Panel podcast did well for a while, and the breaking point was all the Frozen episodes. So sorry about that. That's what
Oh yeah,
tanked
did
our
it actually
numbers.
like take a huge spike in listeners after the
Yeah,
Frozen
yeah.
stuff?
The Frozen stuff is where our listeners plummeted. Uh, but I figured, you know what? I just followed my heart with the Jim Steinman stuff. If I just follow my heart with the Frozen stuff, it'll keep doing well. And then it didn't. But
Nice work.
because I figured the Jim Steinman stuff would plummet the listener numbers because like who's gonna listen to 7 parts on Bad for Good? And I've actually had people who have come on to the because you know how we've taken a hiatus from the show as Victor's listening to the Kiss albums. Um, I've actually started getting comments from people who are weekly listeners, like, "Hey, so I've been missing Lipstick Panel, so now I'm on your YouTube channel. Also, I
Mm,
bought Bad for Good because of you."
nice.
So like we do have some faithful listeners, and like one guy said, I've been listening since episode 1, and just like, who discovered the show on episode 1, and like stuck with it through the Frozen episodes and all that stuff, and couldn't get enough of his Greg Troyan talking about things fixed that he followed me to my YouTube channel.
Right?
Um, but also I'm like, hey, thanks for liking my opinions on music that much. Hopefully you bought a CD at one point, but probably not.
Right. Now I'm just conjuring like if you had a time machine and could go back and tell yourself before you saw that movie, like, all right, Greg, here's the trick. If you're going to go see Frozen, you will fall in love with it. It will become your favorite film of all time, and it will kind of ruin multiple projects that you've put a lot of work into over the course of years.
I don't think it really did that because in terms of Jeremy and Chase, they would have left the band anyway. Like that wasn't going to like they were going to leave like in a week or two anyway, just like they left a week or two earlier than they would have otherwise. Like I mean, I met, a very big successful rock manager who gave us a very reasonable critique of what we should do to be successful, and their thing was to say, "Well, what does that guy know?" I don't know. Only managed multiple multi-million dollar arena acts that are like have had diamond and platinum albums. What does that guy know about managing a music act? Clearly, us who have only played in metal bands that play out in the burbs know more than this guy. That guy's the hack. So yeah, they would have left anyway. It's just like I decided to be really, really eccentric and cover a song from a musical, which by the way is incredibly freaking glam. Like a dude in a glam band saying, I want to cover a song from a musical because I'm theatrical and feeling fanciful. Like that is a very
I'm
Freddie.
feeling fanciful.
That's a very Freddie Mercury, David Bowie kind of thing to do. Like that's just what the glam dudes did. And so like if it wasn't that, it would have been a different song that would have pushed them out of the band, or them, being upset about the commute. Like, certain musicians don't have like work ethic. And whether or not they have that now, is open to debate, but they definitely didn't have it then.
Like I do find that kind of weird that I feel like immediately after he left Lipstick, Chase was like, "All right, I got to work ethic now. I'm serious about all these things."
I mean, it's maybe after going back to bands where the draw sucked, he's like, oh, maybe you know, it's the kind of things where like in some ways I'm like a musical dad to those guys, to a lot of the younger musicians who came into the band, where like they never want to admit I'm right to my face, but as soon as they're out of the band, they're taking all that advice that I had because they saw that things weren't working in their other projects. And, it's just like I just take it with a grain of salt and just like am not upset by it. But I think, if I had a time machine, what I would really do is push the Conan song much earlier in our career when those kind of viral songs were still successful. I think we just waited too long on that.
Mm.
And so pushing that, and then also pushing singles more often and pushing them to labels, I think would have been the way to go. Being less eccentric and focus more on like the hard rock thing. I think pushing, keeping the image, because I think the original image was good. It was distinct, but just like keeping the harder edge sound and pushing more commercial singles and pushing them right away, I think would have been the thing to do. Um, as opposed to focusing so much on the live shows and building up the draw, because the inconsistency of band members really hurt us with that. So really
Yeah.
focusing more on the studio stuff earlier in the process would have been the way to go. But hindsight is 2020, and had I not gone through the process that I did, I wouldn't have my wife. Like if we had become successful, I probably would have gotten an STD and died, and would have been in the 27 club. So instead, I'm not successful, but I'm still alive. So, I'd say that's a win.
I suppose.
And also, like, my legacy would have probably not been that great of a musical one, because I feel like um, I've learned this more and more, is that you are smarter than your audience. And so, like, fans of my music wouldn't have gotten it. If I, like, skyrocketed to success and was in the 27 club, I guarantee you people would be too stupid to get it. And so it wouldn't have been that great of a legacy anyway. We're just like, yeah, this one guy just, like, brought back party hair metal, and it was pretty cool. And, like Cody said, every Lipstick song is secretly about overcoming child abuse. Like that part would
It's
have just
true.
gone over people's heads, and it would have been just like, yeah, he just like did some cool hair metal and then died. The end. So
You'd have been in the 27 club, but people would have been like, "Yeah, I think he just sort of died when he turned 27 out of a sense of obligation, though."
right. As opposed to I feel like my writing is much stronger than my music, and so that's, I feel, what would be the ultimate artistic legacy that I have. Even though I still want to create music and still have a passion for it, it's just like, what am I better at? Michael Jordan, could he play baseball? Actually, yes, he could. But what is he
Better
better
than
at?
us.
Right, he could play baseball better than us, but Michael Jordan, what should you be spending your time on? Should you be spending your time on baseball, which, yes, you have a passion for, and yes, you could be successful at it? Because, I was watching Last Dance, and what they were saying is that if Jordan stuck with it, he would have been a successful baseball player. He was continually getting better and was just about ready for the majors, but he had to, like, shift his, like, body type and muscle mass in a way, because, like, you use different muscles for baseball than you do with basketball.
Right?
But they said, like, if he had kept going with that, like, he wasn't even, doing baseball for a full season and then left. So if he had
Was
kept
it
going,
really that short of a time? I thought he was in it for a couple of years.
no, it was like not even a full season from what I read. Or I think that's what it was. I had to look it up, but it was a very limited time.
Hmm.
Um, and I'm like 90% certain, but I don't want to like open up another tab and potentially lag the podcast. But I think it was because I think he wasn't even away. No, because I think he was away for the Bulls for like for a season and a half. So maybe it was like a year and a half of baseball, but that would have been the max because I think he came back after a half season with them. And speaking of losing the call, hey, speaking of opening up tabs and losing the call, looks like I lost you there for a sec.
Yeah, sorry. I like hit a button on my keyboard that somehow switched to the Skype tab and ended the call.
All right, well it's okay. Well, I'm not editing that. But yeah, I was saying that I think Jordan. I
I
think
mean,
I think Jordan was only out for a season and a half.
yeah. Try and pull up his Wikipedia page. All right. Move that over there and then don't click on that again. No. Tab over to that. All right. Let's see. First retirement and stint in minor league baseball from 1993 to 1994. So he retired in October 1993.
And it was only doing it till 1994.
It looks like it.
Yeah, so that's basically like that. Yeah, so I think like half a season because I think he left midway through to go back to the Bulls. Um,
In November of 94, his number was retired. Interesting. And his team absolutely destroyed that season without him.
but they didn't get a championship.
No, March 95 he quit baseball. So he was in baseball for close to a year and a half.
Okay, so a year and a half. But so in the minors for a year and a half. Um, but that's not very long, especially like completely changing your body type. Um, because in the last dance they were talking about how he had to do like different kinds of exercises, work out different muscles in order to
Right.
have the optimal baseball body. And then when he went back to the Bulls, he still had his baseball body, and that's why he wasn't like up to his normal Michael Jordan standard, and they didn't win a championship when he first came back. And then in the
Uh-huh.
off season, he trained and got his basketball body back, and then continued to dominate for the rest of his career with the Bulls. Um, but yeah, so the point of that was saying that with music, I'm like Michael Jordan with baseball. Like, if I really kept at it, yeah, I could do well. But um, man, losing Steve again. Hey, welcome
Sorry.
back, buddy.
I'm trying to figure out what Windows is doing here. Like the I have two browser windows as like my first two, and I keep on like alt tabbing between the two of them, and it keeps switching to Skype. So when I hit the close window, it's like, oh, you want to end that call? I'm like, no, I didn't.
Yeah, well, I made the point to the listeners multiple times, and hey, hey, did you want to end the call again, buddy?
Okay, I figured it out. Control E, the shortcut for in the browser window that I have open, go to the search bar, is apparently also the shortcut for switch to Skype and hang up the current call. So
Got
uh,
it.
let me just go ahead and disable shortcuts in Skype, apparently.
Well, hey, learning something new. I'm sure I've actually I've had some Skype calls drop. So it's a very buggy, sensitive program in a number of ways. But hey, it's not Zoom, right, buddy?
It's true. It's not Zoom. All right.
What is your
So,
grievance with Zoom in particular?
oh, it's really bad about allowing you to actually control what your microphone and screen are doing at any given time.
Okay.
Like the sort of default that I want for most of these functionalities is I want a big, easily accessible mute button for my own audio, and I want to just see by default either a tile of everybody in the conversation, whatever they're presenting, whether that's an avatar or just a blank screen or their video,
Mm-hmm.
or I want it to switch between whoever's talking for the video. And I want that completely unlinked from whatever I'm feeding in terms of video. Like basically I want my video off by default and then to see tiles of whatever everyone else is doing. And then I want my audio incoming on by default and my outgoing off by default with the ability to toggle that on and off as I see fit.
So you don't
And
want Big Zoom telling you what to do. You want the libertarian freedom of Skype.
I mean, basically every other platform is better about it. Where like Zoom, I kept on running into issues where like I had to uh, enable my microphone in order to be able to. Oh yeah, like Zoom doesn't allow you to connect headphones only. You have to enable a microphone, or they won't enable audio at all.
Interesting. I
So
wonder what is why Zoom has become like the go-to for everyone, especially since like it's a paid service. When there's free options that seem to be comparative and in some ways better, why do you think Zoom has become the go-to for people?
I think the big thing that Zoom offered was, besides marketing, was that it supported larger calls. Like Google Hangouts caps you at 10 people connected, I believe. And I don't know what Skype's limits are, but I suspect they're much lower. Whereas Zoom, like their whole shtick is like you can have 100 people in the meeting. You can only have the meeting for 40 minutes if you don't want to pay money for it, but
Right.
you can have 100 people, which if your entire company is virtual and you need an all company call, that works.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I guess that makes sense. But yeah, other than that, I haven't seen why it's taken off the way it did. But I guess it's probably taken off because of COVID, everyone being remote, and just like,
Yep.
shoot, how are we going to have our important company meetings where we tell people how to do the same job they've been doing?
How do we have our important meeting that should have been an email?
It's ironic that I said the solution to or one of the solutions to police issues is training and reminding them how to do their job when my trainings, when they remind me how to do my job, I find to be a complete waste of time. um, like when we have like company meetings, like this is how you work this kind of account, that thing you've been doing every single day. Uh,
Yay! Hold on, I'm going to try a thing.
okay,
Hooray! I didn't accidentally hang up on you. I found
hooray!
there's a global hotkeys option in Skype.
Ooh, fancy.
Like, yeah, I get super mad when anything messes with my keyboard shortcuts without my explicit settings. So rage inducing. All right, so that's fixed. I can
Well,
now go to Wikipedia
congratulations.
using my normal shortcuts without accidentally hanging up on you.
All right, and now you could look up all the Michael Jordan facts you could want to look up.
Michael Jordan facts.
Were you a Bulls fan in the '90s?
Not particularly. I didn't really follow professional basketball.
Man, you're like
I
one of
knew.
the only ones I know who like, because I'm not like a sports guy in general, but I feel like it's so hard to have like been alive in the '90s and not thought the Bulls were really freaking cool.
I mean, it was one of those things where it was sort of just generally acknowledged that the Bulls were, the best team kind of thing. But I didn't follow them at all, so it was just like I was aware that some of my classmates really liked them,
Right.
and that there was their starting lineup were the best in the game or whatever. Michael Jordan's middle name is Jeffrey.
Facts about Michael Jordan.
He idolized Magic Johnson as a kid.
Facts about Michael Jordan.
He had a custom jersey at one point that said Magic Jordan.
Ooh, facts about Magic Jordan.
He's hydrophobic.
Afraid of water?
Yes.
Interesting. Facts about
Facts
Michael
about
Jordan.
Michael Jordan.
So does that mean he can't swim, or
He
just
might be able to. I don't know. Probably not well.
yeah? I mean, I can't swim, so I mean, I could. I think I could swim enough to save my life, but I don't feel like testing it. One of those kind of deals where like I can doggy paddle and I'm like able to float, but
That's fair.
I'm not the guy who wants to like fall in the ocean. Like, yeah,
I mean, the ocean's tough to swim in regardless, I think.
Yeah, but that I'm pretty sure that'd be a death sentence for me.
So there you go, fans. If you need to find a way to kill Greg with plausible deniability, drop him in the ocean.
That's probably a good stopping point, so they can linger on that thought if they want to do it. Uh, so, Steve, plug your stuff. What do you want to plug?
All right, so the major project that I have still active right now, besides the Lipstick podcast, is Regdar and the Fighters, my solo glitch punk project, which you can find at regdarandthefighters.com, but I haven't updated that website, and it looks like hot garbage right now. So honestly, you should just like go to our Patreon at patreon.com/vomithatsteve. That's probably the most updated thing you can find, or you just find us on Spotify. We're on Spotify. Listen to our music.
Yeah, and hey, we're gonna have a new single because we're actually gonna finish that song, and by we I mean you. Whenever you feel like editing
You got
together,
a microphone. You can record some vamps at home.
but I feel like the quality is gonna be so drastically different. And like the original version doesn't have vamps. Like there isn't a vamp there, so like we don't need it necessarily.
I think our version might. I think I haven't listened to it in months, so I'm not sure.
I guess go back and listen to it and decide if it needs vamps. I mean, we could just like add a musical vamp.
Guitar
Yeah,
solos.
guitar solos. That's a possibility. As we're talking about the production decisions on a single we haven't released, and will definitely allow for more judgment from the listening public.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's the episode. Bye, internet.
Bye.